So let's start. First of all, of course, like for any session, thanks a lot to all the sponsors that make this kind of event possible. I'm going to quickly introduce myself. So I'm Guillaume Meyer. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the founder of two startups, the first one called Sales Team and the second one called GraphShield. We are hosted at Station F, which is a major incubator of startups in Paris, France. I'm a Microsoft Teams MVP since 8 years now, and I'm focused on Microsoft Teams for 3 years. I'm a coffee addict. I got my coffee here, so I'm ready to go. I'm living between Los Angeles and Paris, and you have my Twitter and LinkedIn accounts. I'm gonna share the slide deck after this session, so just subscribe to my Twitter account and you're gonna see the link in the next few minutes after the session. Just to introduce in just one slide, so I'm the founder of Sales Team. Sales Team is Microsoft Teams app, and it's an all-in-one governance automation platform for Microsoft Teams. The point of this session is not to talk about my product. So just if you're interested to see what we're doing, just look at our website at salesteam.com. We're in this business on Microsoft Teams app for more than 3 years now. We're probably the oldest one in the market, and we are Microsoft 365 certified. So definitely we're working with corporate and enterprise companies on governance, security automation, compliance, and business process automation. So let's start this session. First of all, what is this session? It's going to be really a geek session. It's tech for fun, and it's going to be really technical. The purpose of this session is really to dive into the technologies that Microsoft is using to build the Microsoft Teams client. And to do that, we're going to have to really dive into some technical aspects. Don't do this at home. Why? Because what I'm going to do today in front of you, it's definitely not something you should do in production environments. I don't recommend this. It's really just for fun and to try to gain some knowledge and about the technologies and the great solution that is Microsoft Teams. So what we're going to see today, we're going to have a very quick overview of the Microsoft Teams client architecture. And then we're going to see the different prerequisites and what is the Microsoft Teams client package, what happens when you're installing the Teams client. Then we're going to dive into the Microsoft Teams source code. It might be quite surprising for some of you, but technically we can't access the whole source code, but some of it. So that's what we're going to look at. And then we're going to see what we can do with that, what we can learn from it, and how we can play with it and hack technically into the product. So let's start. So this is public information that Microsoft has shared about the Microsoft Teams client architecture. You get two major kinds of clients for desktop and mobile. As for today, I'm going to focus on the desktop version. And as you can see, it's basically a web application. It's basically a web application that is really made from standard web technologies using TypeScript, Node, and jQuery, and so on. But aside from that, we don't have a lot of information from Microsoft about it. So what I did is kind of reverse engineered the Microsoft Teams client to understand what it is made of, what kind of components and services are built in. And I found some very interesting stuff. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to use the Microsoft Teams client for Linux, which is quite recent. But just keep in mind that everything I'm going to show to you today could be done on Mac or Windows, just because the Linux client is quite open and it's my development environment, so it's quite easier. So the first step is we're going to use Microsoft WSL. So what is it? It's basically a Linux virtual machine inside Windows. And what we can do quite a lot of fun stuff. first of all, we can install desktop Linux applications such as Microsoft Teams, but we can install pretty much any graphical application such as Firefox, for instance. So I can launch Firefox, and as you can see, it's really the Linux version of Firefox running on my Windows box. I'm going to close it, and I can launch Slack. I can launch a lot of different applications. So once you do that, you are able to install Microsoft Teams on Linux. And what we're going to do is I'm going to just quickly show you how you can basically download Microsoft Teams and extract the package. So I'm going to just release this. So the easiest way to download Microsoft Teams for Linux is just to launch the standard Microsoft download page. And you can download for desktop. It detects that I'm on Linux, and I can download the Linux package. So once I have this package, I can basically install the package and launch Teams. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go here and launch Teams. And so right from my Windows environment, I'm able to launch Microsoft Teams. It's quite easy. And as you can see, that's really the Linux version with different set of icons, but that's quite the same client. OK, so now we have the basics. And what we're going to see, I'm going to just kill. So now I have basically a Linux environment and the Microsoft Teams client installed. So what we're going to do now is we're going to extract. And basically the package I just downloaded, it's basically just an archive, just like a zip file. And I can unzip it, and we're going to have a look at what's inside. So I already unzipped it, so we're going to look at what we have inside the Microsoft Teams package. So I'm launching Visual Studio Code. I hope it's big enough for you to read it on the screen. I can maybe zoom in a little bit more. So basically, we have the different structure of the Microsoft Teams client. Especially, we have the startup script, which is what is really launching the Microsoft Teams client. And we get a lot of folders and content from here. I won't dive into all the details, but just underline what is really interesting. So first of all, that's the script that launched Microsoft Teams. Again, I won't read all these contents, but basically it's just a link to the Microsoft Teams executable file and a link to the log folder, basically where Microsoft Teams is going to store all the technical logs. So it's a standard shell script. Then we have the desktop file, which describes how Microsoft Teams is seen on a desktop, meaning what is the icon, what is the description, the title, the version, and so on. And then we have all these files. These files are basically all binary. So basically, we can't really see what's inside, but we can already see a lot of interesting stuff. So first of all, we can see here this file, which is a standard file for Electron apps. For those who don't know, Electron is the technology that Microsoft is using to have this almost the same client between the web and the desktop. Basically, Electron is kind of a web browser when you can execute web applications on a desktop. And then we have a lot of files, the locals, which defines all the different text in different languages, the one that appears on the screen. And we have some resource, some assets. So as you can see here all the different pictures that are right inside Teams. We get pictures, we get music, that's the sounds that you can hear when you have a notification, when you're starting a meeting, when the phone is ringing, blah, 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 blah. As you can see, that's just standard MP3 files. So basically, it's all the resource. The problem with that is that we don't see really the code that is used by Microsoft. And all the code is stored in this file. It's called app.asar. And again, it's just a zip file. So we're gonna, in the next few minutes, we're gonna extract it and look more in details. But just to summarize what we can understand right now. So first of all, we have the startup script that is, again, a standard shell script for Linux, but you have exactly the same principle with the link to an executable on Windows. And then you have what is called binary dependencies. So let me explain that quickly. So Microsoft Teams is supposed to be a web client, but for some operations, and I'm going to detail which one, some operations require access to low-level features. And the Microsoft Teams client is embedding some binary dependencies. So we won't have the source code for them, but it's especially used for graphical libraries. This one is called Swift Shader. It's used by Microsoft Teams clients to display some graphical elements. And we have the second one, which is Slim Core. And Slim Core is the component inside the Microsoft Teams client that is in charge of telephony and audio and media processing. Basically, doing this in a pure web client would not be very efficient. That's probably why Microsoft is packaging this Slim Core component as a binary dependency. Now we have the big picture, and we're gonna really dive into the source code. So as I mentioned earlier, we've seen that there is a file called app.asar, and you can basically install this tool, which is called SR, that will help us extract all the source code from part of the source code of the Microsoft Teams client. So just to have more time, I already extracted the source code. So I'm going to navigate to my I'm going to open it. And for those of you that have already that know anything about development, they should see something quite familiar. So basically, it's the entire source code structure of the Microsoft Teams client. I mean, part of it. And what do we have here? We have a Node.js project. And you can definitely see it through the Node modules folder and different elements. This folder structure is quite standard. If you look at different other applications built using Electron, such as Slack or Signal or whatever, you will definitely find the same kind of structure. So again, we're finding the locals, meaning all the text that appear on the screen inside the application for all the different languages. So for instance, we got the Spanish for Mexico version, and I can see here all the different texts visible in the application. And I got the same one for English US, and so on. And you get this for all the different countries and languages. Where we have here is the binary components. I mentioned this earlier. What is interesting here is that we have access to some of it, but the key aspect of this project and the key structure is here, lib. And from here, you have access to a lot of, I mean, I don't know what part of the source code it is, but we have access to some very interesting stuff. And from these different folders, you can already recognize some different technical aspects and some features of the product. For instance, you have this folder where you have the source code in charge of notifications. And as you can see, you get a specific folder for notification on macOS. And we can really open it. And I'm not going to do that today. But if you're interested, you can really look at how it works. And from here, you have access to the entire source code of the notification system from Microsoft Teams. So if you're curious and a little bit geek, you can definitely look at it. There's a lot. This project is quite big, so I haven't looked at everything, but it's quite interesting. There's some very interesting aspects. For the most curious of you may already notice that this code is Node.js code, and it generated one, meaning that it's Node.js generated from TypeScript. So we don't have really access to the original source code, but we can learn a lot from this environment. So I'm going to go back to my slide deck, and I try to summarize what I've learned so far by analyzing the source code and what I was able to understand from it. So first of all, the project is identified. I started in 2016, so it's quite early. And I was able to really identify some major and interesting components. The first one is called KTAR, which is an open source project, just like 99.9% of the source code of Microsoft Teams. And this component is in charge of handling the security of the different keys and tokens. So basically, when you're entering your login and password, so the client doesn't store directly the password, but it stores some tokens. And KTAR is really interesting because it works on Windows, on Mac, and on Linux. So it's a key component for Microsoft that they can use across the different platforms. Another example is FastText. FastText is an open source library that was published by Facebook, by the way, and that performs various text analysis operations. Especially when I looked at the source code, you can see that Microsoft Teams is using it to perform some language detection. So basically, you're entering some text in a conversation or description, and Microsoft Teams needs to understand what is your language. So this service is, for instance, capable to detect the language based by reading some text. My question was, I was quite surprised to see this kind of component, because Microsoft is has a lot of different Azure services to do text analytics. But the key thing with FastText is that you can use it offline, and it's really fast. And I think, I'm not sure about that, but I think it's one of the reasons why Microsoft is using it, because in the future, Microsoft Teams may have some basic or advanced offline mode. So they try to favor this kind of components that they can use both when the Teams client is connected or when it's offline. Another interesting component that you can see from the source code is Squirrel. And it's an open source project. It's very common. A lot of projects are using Squirrel. Basically, this component is in charge of the application updates. So when you're starting the application, sometimes you're inside Teams and you see a message, you have the latest version of Teams. That's this component in charge of that. And just for fun, let's say I integrated here an extract of the source code that is in charge of updating the application and restart it. And as you can see, it's using the Squirrel for Windows or the Squirrel component here. Then there's a very interesting file. This file is a configuration file. It's called config.json, and it's quite long. Let me show you. But we can learn some interesting stuff. So for instance, here, it's called the server endpoint map. That's basically the different environments that you can run Microsoft Teams. And basically, when you're launching Teams, you're depending on the account you're using to log in. It's going to connect to the regular Microsoft Teams environment, the one you have at teams.microsoft.com. But as you can see here, you get two different environments. The first one is Gov for government, and as you can see, it's only for government in the US, and it has a dedicated URL. And again for DoD, for the Department of Defense. So there's a lot of code and things going on based on this configuration. And there's also a lot of interesting options that you can see. It's quite self-explanatory. For instance, does the multi-window is enabled or not? Same for SSO, spell checker, the URL shortener, and so on. I'm going to show you very quickly what it looks like. So that's this file here, the root. It's quite big. It's gigantic. But there's when you really start to dive into this, there's really interesting stuff, such as URLs, and you can see the different server components that are used too. So if you're curious, you can definitely open this kind of file and try to look at it. There's some interesting stuff to understand. Okay, I'm gonna make a pause just for a few seconds. And do you have any questions so far about what you've seen? Maybe you don't. Anyway, I'm going to move forward, and don't hesitate if you have any question. Okay, so now we're going to have some more fun stuff that I found in the project. So Microsoft, for some reason, they left some comments inside the code. I'm surprised that there's no, I mean, quite often you have a lot of code or nothing. In this project, I just had some lines of comments. And for instance, the first one, that's a message from a developer that said that he has to fight against TypeScript. I love this expression. We have to fight against TypeScript here. He has some, he's struggling to do something with TypeScript. So that's quite fun, and I'm going to try to extract a lot more. We can also find reference to TeamSpace. And TeamSpace, for those who don't know, was the name of Teams before its official launch. And so we still have a lot of reference to this code name, and it's spread across the source code, so it's still visible. The same as some reference to some previous code name using Skype. And something I never understood, which is Alfonso. There's reference to this option called Enable Alfonso. I have no idea what it is. I asked Microsoft folks about this. Nobody's able to tell me what it is. So if anybody has an idea, I would be glad. So please tell me. Okay, so we had a very brief overview of some internal pieces of the Microsoft Teams client source code. But the question is, what can we do with that? So first, I tried to debug. Why? Because I had an issue with Microsoft Teams. I really had a bug. And it was really hard for the Microsoft Teams, for the Microsoft employees to diagnose the issue and to understand what was happening. So I tried to do it myself. I really tried by using all my knowledge about it, but definitely I was not able to run Microsoft Teams in debug mode for two reasons. Mostly because there's an issue with the Node version that Microsoft is using to build the project. And also, I don't have access to some repository that are required to rebuild the project. But anyway, I'm going to try again someday. Maybe I'm going to figure out. But what we can do is really update and patch the client. So again, I don't recommend you to do that. But just for fun, I'm going to show you what I can do with the source code. So basically, I'm going to reopen here this page. I'm going to open the main.js, which is the main file for the application. And I'm just going to type some code. And what is it? Basically, it waits for 10 seconds, and then it shows a dialog, a message box with a message, and hacked from M365 California. Save this file, and as you can see, I can really update the source code directly. But again, now I have to build it and execute it. So that's what I'm going to do. It's not that complex. If you're interested, I just gave here some examples. But basically, we're going to just rebuild the file that we extracted and launch it. So I'm gonna try to do it live. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the ASAR command and repack the entire folder into the app.asar file. That's quite fast. And now I'm going to copy this file into the Microsoft Teams folder. Okay. And now I'm going to launch Teams. So Teams is starting. So I didn't break anything. It's launching the first main application, which is a custom app. And oh, as you can see here, right from Microsoft Teams, I have a nice message box that appears. So of course, it's quite straightforward. It's not very useful, but just an example to show you that basically we have some techniques that I will never use in production again, but for diagnostic and to understand how it works, that's really fun. And we can basically customize some aspects of the Microsoft Teams client by injecting some custom code. There we go. So I tried to keep it very short. I'm gonna please open your mic for questions or if you want to see something again. Okay, thank you so much. And again, I'm going to publish the slide deck in the next few minutes. And you can contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Thank you.